awesome panelists, and I am going to introduce them each one by one and let them give you a little bit of their story about why they're here today, and then we'll get into questions. So, with no further ado, Elwyn Loomis. Yeah, happy to come here. And
Want me to come up? Or? Okay.
Either way you want to do it.
Okay. Oh my gosh, I'm actually first. So, you know, I didn't want to take too much time to talk about me in this or talk about the journey that I have gone on. Really, I'm interested in the conversation about we and about us, right? Because we have to figure out where we're going and how we drive innovation going forward and transformation. But I will give you a little bit of background about what I've done and use that as kind of context. So I was really blessed over the last 5 years. Now, I have kind of a bizarre journey that I had. I came out here. I was not a native Minnesotan. I grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania, dairy farm. That's why I became a technologist. You know, if anybody has been on a dairy farm, you know it's a lot of work. And while I've worked really hard all my life, at least I haven't had to milk the cows every morning. But one of the things that brought me to Minnesota was, and made me stay here actually, is that everyone is like 1 or 2 generations from the farm, right? We have this great ethos about us, this ability to work hard, and it really felt natural for me to be here. So I've been here for 30 years now. I have been involved in transformation pretty much all of my career. I've been involved with a bunch of skunk works, and yes, I can be blamed for a lot of them. I had an opportunity to work with a company, Taylor Corporation, with Glenn Taylor, and I worked with him for a number of years. I had an opportunity then to go to Target, and I was with Target for 13 years. And then I left Target to be the CTO of a manufacturing company in China. So my wife and I moved to China for about 3 years. We found our way back. I worked with a startup, Code 42, did some more work again with Taylor Corporation, and then I came back to Target 5 years ago. Now, the reason why I want to talk to you about that just briefly is when I came back to Target, it wasn't the company that it was when I had first been introduced there. So in the 90s, Target was one of those companies that was kind of, it allowed you to be an entrepreneur. You know, we could do a lot of interesting things. We could try. We were very lean. We were agile before it was even agile. And we really got a chance to do a lot of awesome test and learn. But when I came back 5 years ago, we had lost that. And more importantly, we had lost a number of the people who do. And one of the things that I think happened, and a lot of Fortune 50 companies, this happened with them, is they kind of fell into the trap that if I can define a problem well enough, I can kind of commoditize the getting it done. Now that's a real problem, okay? It's not a problem when your environment is not changing, but when the ecosystem around you is changing and you need to be agile and you need to be a doer, you need to get shit done, right? All of a sudden, you become very slow if all you are definers. So when I came back 5 years ago and I started looking for the engineers, I was like, where are these engineers? And by the way, I'm an engineer. I'm a software engineer, so forgive me. So doing is very much in my blood. I couldn't find any of the engineers. And so I made it my mission from God to start building back the engineers. And so a lot of this people started calling a digital transformation. But I don't like using the word transformation because this is what it feels like, right? It feels like this. But really, this is not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is solve a problem. And the problem that we were trying to solve is how do you compete in an ecosystem where people are smarter and faster than you are? That's really the problem that we need to solve. And the answer for this is that you start doing, right? You turn your organization into an organization of makers. And as we talk about what we want to do for the children and our youth and the people that we want to mentor, right, and bring them in, the most important thing I can say to everybody is not about STEM. It's about how do you as an individual learn to make? How do you learn to do? How do you learn to create? Because we are in an awesome environment today, an environment where I've got all of the tools around me to be able to take my idea and compete against a big company. We never had this before. When I started 30 years ago in technology, I needed to have all this infrastructure if I wanted to create any service, product, or capability. And today, as one person, I can mash up other people's infrastructure. So if I want to have a data center, I can mash up a data center. I can use Google's data center. I can use Amazon's data center. And I pay per the piece that I use of that. It used to be I had to build that. If I want to create a retail storefront, I can make a pop-up retail storefront, and I can have that. If I want to use somebody else's supply chain, I can mash up a supply chain. One person using these technologies can create a product, service, and capability. And I think that's really important. So I just want to kind of lay that as groundwork for where we're going. So I'm going to go very quickly now, but I'm just going to say that in order to do transformation side of any organization, it's going to be a number of things. It's huge changes in your culture, your talent, and your tools. And that's not only the transformation we need to make in enterprise, but the transformation we have to do it for ourselves. Because the transformation is not just for organizations, it's for the people and for ourselves as well, right? And I was lucky and blessed to learn how to do a transformation by actually doing, and that was cool. So, in order to do this, it required all my skills, and those are the superpowers of finding, enrolling, connecting, and caring for brilliant talent. Because in the end, it's not about the technology, it's about us, and it's about the talent that we have around us. And I actually had a conversation right before this where somebody said to me, geez, how do we compete, let's say people who are over 50, with the millennials who are coming into the marketplace, right? And I'm like, well, we don't need to. We mentor, right? Because there is something about the experience of what we know how to do to take with the energy of the people who are young and fired up to do. We teach them to do, right? So we need to teach and mentor. And it's not about competing, it's about raising the level for all of the boats. And I think that's one of the things that I want in our conversations here, to figure that out. How do we do that? How do we raise that level? The key learning, and by the way, this was a skunkworks that I made within Target called the Rebel Alliance. Our intent 5 years ago was to overthrow the empire. And I'm happy to say that now there's a culture of making within Target that we didn't have 5 years ago, so that's cool. Last thing, the thing that I learned from all this is that we are not cogs in the machine. We make the machines. As long as we keep that in mind, we're not victims of the machinery around us. We make the machines on all levels, right? At the heart of it, it's all our fingerprints. Last thing I want to kind of say here is that I love Minnesota. I love our region. We're living the legacy today that we were just being told between 3M, Control Data, Honeywell, Dayton Hudson Corporation, General Mills, and a whole pile of others, right? We have an amazing ecosystem. The slide that he showed you before was the billion-dollar companies. This is all of the companies greater than $100 million a year revenue that are headquartered here in the Twin Cities. So take a look at that. Isn't that interesting? It's profit, nonprofit, and privately held. That's a huge ecosystem. And that is what's really exciting. And the other thing I want to kind of encourage all of us to think about in these conversations going forward and how we're going to lay out what we're going to be doing here in the future is, yes, we do have a bunch of really great verticals here. And I lived for many years in the retail vertical. And what I found out just recently in the last few months as I've kind of gone out of the retail vertical is that there is just as deep expertise in each of these other verticals within our ecosystem. What we don't do very well is cross-pollinating across them, right? And I believe that we, as a region, have a unique, probably within the US, we have a unique opportunity here where we could create products and services across these verticals that could never be done anywhere else. And I've used the story of like, there's nowhere else in the world right now that if you said that you wanted to create a cure for diabetes, if you wanted to do a moonshot like that you would be able to do anywhere else. But you could do it here, because if you got General Mills with the food science, if you got Target with the guest, if you got United Health Group with the data that they've got, the Mayo, and you put that together with Medtronics with implantable devices, you know what? And you started iterating on a kind of crawl, walk, run. I would say that over a few years you would be able to do a moonshot like that. You can't do that in any other region. So as we look at this, as we all look at each other here in this room, think about how we can cross-pollinate and how we can teach our kids how we can work across these domains. Because a lot of times we don't understand the depth that we have in these domains. We've got data scientists who are really, really deep in med tech, and if we apply their domain expertise to things like retail, we could really do some amazing things. So just think about how we can cross-pollinate. So I am really honored here to be with all of you, because I think this conversation is what can help drive the future of our region. I love the region as much as all of you, and I'm really excited about cross-pollinating and then kind of getting some stuff done. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, now I also want to give the option, if you want to stay seated and give your presentation, that's fine. I will work the slides for you as you tell me to put them forward. If you want to come down, you can do that too. It's up to you. But with Jean, take it away.
Hi, I'm Jean Weiss, and I'm Executive Director of Code Savvy. I want to tell you a little story about how I got involved in Code Savvy. I was in industry in Minnesota for 40, well, I had a couple of years in California, but for about 40 plus years. And I finally decided I was going to retire. And but the last thing, right after I retired, 3 days after I retired, I went to a MHTA conference, and I went to one of the sessions, and I met this wonderful, innovative, entrepreneurial woman named Rebecca Schatz. And after her presentation, where she talked about what Code Savvy was, I went up and I waited till everyone else asked their questions, and I said, you know, I would really like to volunteer for you full-time. So that was my retirement. I met her, we went out to lunch for 3 hours, and talked and talked and talked, and I said, I'm on board, and I got started. So her vision, Rebecca started the Works Museum, and then after she left the Works, she started Code Savvy. And her objective was always to bring engineering and technology and all those things to kids, to learn from as young as grade school, preschool, all the way through high school, to bring them through and have them understand what all of technology is about. So that's how I got started in Code Savvy. Code Savvy, she put together a bunch of programs, which I'll talk through a little bit, but the main objective is to bring technology and know-how to local kids and educators, because educators is where we can get that exponential leap of training the educators, who then bring it to all the children in their school and bring it to their cohorts in their schools. We also are focused on gender and ethnic diversity, and basically we're trying to help Minnesota have more talent for you all to be hiring. So that's sort of the big goal here. Our first program, one of our biggest programs, is called Technovation Minnesota. It's an all-girls entrepreneurship and coding program. It is actually part of the largest all-girls tech entrepreneurship program in the world, called Technovation Challenge, which is based out of San Francisco. We just concluded our 4th year, and it's really been exciting. We've had 650 girls on 140 teams from 40 schools throughout the state of Minnesota go through our program. This past year, we had actually 250 girls, and our final event, they build a mobile app to solve a community problem, and they build a business around it. So they're learning entrepreneurship and building technology. And this past year, we had over 900 people attend an event called Appapalooza, where the girls pitch to the judges, and then we celebrate their success. This past year, 2 of our teams were runners-up in the finals, runners-up in the Global Technovation Challenge out of over, I believe it was 1,000 teams, or 10,000 teams, 10,000 teams. So, and they got cash prizes, and we actually had one team that actually went to actually was a finalist 3 years ago and actually got to go to the finals in San Francisco, and then they actually were at the last Obama Science Fair. So it's really a great opportunity for the girls. After Technovation, and this is from the global perspective, that 78% were more interested in computer science, 58% enrolled in more computer science courses, 70% were more interested in entrepreneurship, and 26 of the alumni are majoring in computer science in college. That's 65% higher than the national average of 0.4%. So it's a really great program for girls. We also have an educator program, so you can back up a few.
Nope.
You were too quick.
Sorry about that.
And this is to develop knowledgeable and visionary educators to help make Minnesota a leader in computer science. Actually, this program is a finalist in the Techne Awards this year against 2 other great organizations within Minnesota. But what we do is we have a cohort every year that meets monthly. During the school year, it's about 35 teachers. They are each asked to train what they learn in monthly sessions, train them to train 10 others in their school. Thus far, we've reached, in the past 2 years, we reached over 1,000 educators and nearly 13,000 students just through this one program. We're now in our 3rd year, and we have about 35 cohort members. We also have a summit in May, and we do some scratch camps in the summer. We also have Coder Dojos, and I don't know if anybody knows what they are, but Coder Dojos are Saturday afternoon programs. Actually, there's one going on this afternoon at the University of Minnesota that kids ages 8 to 16 come together and learn all sorts of different coding techniques, anything from Arduino to Scratch to App Inventor to a variety of other things. So far, in 2016, we trained over 800 unique kids, coded over 2,800 hours. So we have 3 of those. One is an all-girls. As you can see, the logo is Rebecca Coder Dojo, named after Rebecca, and it's an all-girls Coder Dojo. We find that girls do better in general when they're with their tribe, so to speak. And then the last 2 programs we have are our code clubs and Digital Empowerment Academy, and they both are focused on the inner city schools and the younger kids, ages grades 4 to 8, and then digital and DEA are ages 13 to 17. So we are training the next generation of your employees. And I've lived in Minnesota my whole adult life, and although I spent 2 years in California, it was too crowded, so I came back here. Now this is getting a little crowded, but it's a great technology world out there, so thanks.
Thank you very much. All right, next up for an intro is Dipinder. And yep, absolutely, I'll let you come down here.
I'll bump you out.
Okay.
Morning, everyone. I'm actually going to start with a show of hands. How many of you have ever felt too hot or too cold in your homes or offices? Yeah. So really, my journey starts with your raised hands. Just so you know, I'm not at all a HVAC guy, but if any of you use Verizon, there's a 95% chance it goes over a network that I did. My claim to fame is at one point, I had the world's largest, fastest router sitting in my garage for 5 years. So when I had to send it back home, back to Juniper, my wife made me put a nice big heater to keep the house warm. But essentially speaking, what ended up happening is my daughter was 1, we moved into a big house, we put her in her own bedroom, and she would wake up in the middle of the night crying. So I found out that the temperature in her room was dropping about 10 degrees at night, so she was uncomfortable, so that's why she was waking up. So as a self-respecting engineer, I quit my job to fix the damn problem. So this is why we're here, right? So the problem really lies in HVAC controls, right? I mean, they're very flexible. They're kind of like Lego blocks. You can do a lot of things with them. But the interesting thing is you need a Lego master to come in and make a custom solution for you. So what ends up happening is, in some ways, the HVAC industry is kind of like the computing industry back in the 70s. Back then, when you got an Apple I, you were expected to bring it home, you were going to learn to solder it and put it together, and then learn a programming language to solve your own problems, kind of like the Flintstones. Right? Today, it's inconceivable to not walk into a mall, you want to buy an iPhone, and you want to be productive in 3 minutes. If it ever takes you 5 minutes to be productive, you're screaming your head off. However, in the controls industry, people still do this. It's interesting. What they do is they buy best of breed products, and then they bring them together, and then they reprogram them and do a custom job each and every time. So they're reinventing the wheel each and every time. So that makes it very, very expensive. That's why most people prefer to use something like this. This is one of the people we work with. He issued what he called a temperature stick to his tenants so that they can open and close the dampers themselves. Right? So the question really became, could we make building controls so simple that non-specialized folks could actually install them? And that was our goal. And to prove that, what we did is we recently did a project in an elementary school. A little bit of a twist. We actually asked the kids who were 8 and 9-year-olds to go put in our system themselves. So they did. I mean, they actually went and installed the entire building control solution just after watching a couple of videos. I mean, their highlight, drilling holes in the school walls. Right? That's what they care about. They're so familiar with technology, people are so adept at that you don't have to reinvent things all over again. So what we did is we think of ourselves as Apple meets Khan Academy. Right? So it's very easy to install these solutions. That's part of what Tom was talking about. The technology itself is very accessible right now. Right? The question is, you have to find a use case, and then you have to apply it to a specific problem. So that's what we did. So we think of it as a vertically integrated solution that's very easy to apply, but then you pair it with great educational content. Things like videos that people can get their heads around. So essentially, it's easier to understand, and then you disrupt the building industry. I guess it's an easy formula. But the key thing that we have really done is we have taken all of the knowledge that those controls guys have and put it in software. Right? And that's the key of what we're doing with machine learning, that what Tom Polenti was talking about. What we do is we take in the sensor data from a building and then create a thermal model of the building, look at the weather forecast, and predict how the building is going to behave and figure out an optimal strategy. Right? So you then end up controlling the building far more optimally. So you get a lot of benefits. I won't go into that, but basically, primarily, you can see that you end up with a lot more comfort, and you end up saving a lot of energy. Typically, between 30 to 50% is what we expect. We've actually done third-party validation trials in which we ended up saving over 70% over a winter. So there's a lot of promise in this technology in terms of optimizing this stuff. But the key thing that I keep thinking about is, can you imagine that 10 years from now, when you're sitting in your driverless car, that you should still be uncomfortable in your building? Of course not. Right? Somebody's going to change that paradigm, and we believe that's going to be us. Cool. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you. By the way, the name 75F comes from, in case you haven't guessed, what's the optimal physiologic temperature for people to be at? 75. See, if you are at your home, you could just go back and just turn up your thermostat to 75 if you wanted to. But in the UN, they had all their conference rooms, they were set to 68. And the primary reason they were set to 68, even in the summer, was people wore heavy jackets and you had to dress up when you go to the United Nations. So they actually had to pass a resolution in the United Nations to turn up the thermostat from 68 to 75. But they did it with the relaxation of the dress code, so you can actually go in a Hawaiian shirt now to the United Nations. So.
Thank you, Deepinder. All right, and finally, last but not least, our very own Andrew Lee graduated from St. Thomas Academy a number of years ago. I don't have the year exactly, but I'll let you take it from here, Andrew.
Sure, I'll let you run the slides.
All right.
Good morning. Happy to be here. So that's me. In 2002, I am a Minnesota native and an STA grad. I was part of the experimental vehicle team here, building an electric car. I then went to school in Indiana. I got a degree in computer science and electrical engineering, and then I moved out to California. And I've kind of always wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I've tried this a few times. If you want to go to the next slide here. And I'm best known as a founder of, and then I tried a bunch of stuff. I actually quit my sort of last real job in December of 2007 and joined up with another St. Thomas student that I knew from here, and we tried some things and we tried some more things, and most of them went nowhere. But eventually, one of those things worked. And if you want to go to the next slide. And we built a product designed for mobile and web app development that allowed people to store and synchronize data really easily, and it took off. And it is now, if you want to go one more slide here, it is now something that if you are in the app development space is really internationally recognized now. It's the largest development platform in the world. It stores the data for a lot of people. It provides things like push notifications. It does advertising. It does A/B testing, and it's gone very well. We were acquired by Google in 2014, so we're now Google's kind of flagship mobile platform, and I work there now, and I live in San Francisco.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So as you can see, we have a pretty star-studded cast of technology people here with us today. And now we're going to just kind of get into questions. And I encourage you, if you have things, if you have thoughts, there's paper and pens sitting there. You can write your thoughts down, and if you've got a question you want to ask, we've got a mic as well that we can start to pass around and go from there. But I will kick things off, and one other thing I want to mention that I probably should have said in the beginning, our hashtag, MNTech2G. Feel free to tweet or do whatever you want. So we're looking for all the street cred we can get. So there you go. All right. So guys, again, thank you for being here. Let's start talking about our first topic today, which is that word digital transformation. And I'll also say that some of you talked about this a little bit already. You don't need to feel obliged. You can always say pass or whatever. We can keep this as casual as we want. So digital transformation is a bit of a buzzword. It means many things to many people. How have you experienced that or come to understand? What would your definition of digital transformation be? And maybe, what has it done to your work? So what's your definition of digital transformation as you've experienced it, and how has it affected you in the work that you do? Andrew, you want to kick it off?
Sure. I don't know if I can define the word, but I can definitely talk about some examples that I've seen both in my own work and then in the work that we've enabled. So if you look at the Firebase company, it was started by just two of us. It was initially something that was bootstrapped. We funded it just with our own savings and credit card debt for about 3.5 years, and we're able to build things that 20 years ago would have required building a data center and spending a lot of money by using a whole bunch of cool technologies and services that other people had built, and the ubiquity of phones made our software a lot more valuable. So we were definitely the beneficiary of that. And then in turn, our whole business is built on the idea that we can enable smaller, faster teams to do much more than they used to be able to do. So we have people today building and launching apps on the order of weeks sometimes that end up being quite successful, doing things that long ago would have required very large teams or a lot of investment. And they do stuff all over the map. So we have a couple of the crazier stories. The World Health Organization built an app specifically to fight the Ebola epidemic a couple years ago, and that was something they built in our technology. Another one that was a little bit crazy, there was a lot of piracy around Somalia a couple years back as well, and there was an industry that set up for defense types to get on those ships with armament, and they would go past the Somali coast and help defend those ships from pirates, and they had technology to track those folks and to monitor all the munitions that they had, and that was another app that they put together very quickly. And I have a long list of the types of things that people have done with our software that just wouldn't have been possible with the team sizes 10 or 20 years ago.
It's amazing to see all the things that you wouldn't expect, that digital transformation, what this new infrastructure is allowing us to do. So thank you. Those were fantastic examples. Gene, how about you?
So remember that graph that Tom had up there, a technology graph where it started in 1980 and kind of spiraled up? Well, I started before then. When I went to college, I went to Purdue University, and they did not have a computer science degree. I majored in math, so I've seen massive transformation across time, and even today, and that little spiral at the end, even today with our kids, we're trying to make sure that they have exposure to just about anything and everything, because actually what they're learning today, when you talk about grade schoolers or middle schoolers, maybe high schoolers not so much, but when they get out of school, what they're learning through us today won't necessarily be what they will be using when they're out in the world, in the business world. But we're teaching them many different things so that they're agile enough to go to the next whatever comes their way. I remember my first job, there were people, I worked at Control Data for a long time, and there were people there that never left Control Data because they had their niche and they never continued learning, because I think that it wasn't that big a deal way back then. Nowadays, everything changes constantly. And so our hope is to be able to provide them the knowledge to be able to transform as they keep moving forward.
Yeah, that's a number of interesting things you bring up. If you think about the pace of change, and you think about these big transformations that have happened over time, from agricultural revolution to the industrial revolution to the internet revolution. Do you notice anything about those? Again, it's that kind of exponential pattern. Things are turning so quick now. They're talking about these turns in just a number of years now, 5, 6 years, when we have these just major changes. And I think another statistic that kind of goes along with that is, the students that are in school today here at St. Thomas Academy, the jobs that they will probably land in 5 years from now, many of them aren't invented yet. So wrap your head around that, right? So it is hard to aim, and these skills that she talks about are also important. So this isn't all about just learning a specific technology, and I hope that's a message that people get today. It's about understanding the transformation that we're in and understanding how you bring different skills to it, and that there's a lot of important skills. So just a little side. Deep, how about you?
I mean, from our perspective, I look at, we call it digital transformation only because it's bits and bytes, but I mean, it's transformation in general, right? It's been enabled by the cheap commoditization of technology and compute power, right? What cloud computing has allowed us to do, what the revolutions in the semiconductor industry have allowed us to do, is have ubiquitous sensors and compute power which is accessible to everyone. The iPhone 10, which is coming up, is going to have more compute power than a MacBook Pro from last year. Right? So, I mean, it's quite amazing what you hold in your hand these days. From our perspective, I mean, things that we do in terms of the machine learning and the computational dynamic, those would not have been possible if cloud computing didn't exist. When we originally started, I remember having a server in my room, and we could run maybe 2 buildings. And these were small buildings. You could actually run a home. That's where we started, right? You could run the computations for 2 buildings on a server overnight. And now what we're doing is we're doing hundreds of buildings which are large. The largest one we're looking at is 1.4 million square feet. You get millions of data points coming in every day. So I mean, if that compute power that was not necessarily accessible, that mashup that Elvin was talking about, the ability to use cloud computing services like Firebase, if they didn't exist, I mean, to start from scratch is monumental. Right. The key thing to understand is that I think we work on STEM, but we also have to be very receptive to the fact of understanding what is it, the problem that we're truly trying to solve. Right? If you start with the end in mind, it's much easier. The technology is going to become relatively easy over the years. What's not going to become easy is the application of the technology. So you really have to understand what is it that you want to do and then work backwards rather than trying to use a hammer waiting for a nail.
Thank you. Elwin.
You know, I took a few notes. First thing, I just want to say I admire anybody who had a Juniper in their garage. I had a number of things in my basement and servers in my basement. And Andrew, by the way, I use your technology. Thank you very much. And
Awesome.
And you know, we do welcome you back to Minnesota if you want to just come back here and leave the Bay. There is a house by a lake that we can have for you if you want, which is harder to get in Palo Alto. You know, I wrote down a couple of just words here that I want to throw out to you that I think is that I've learned about the transformation, and I think it underscores what everybody has talked about here. And so, in no particular order, first thing is multiplier, right? All of these technologies, right, are allowing us to multiply our own efforts. And so as long as people realize that we now have multipliers that we didn't have before, and it doesn't have to be just technology, but you have business systems that become multipliers. And so multiplier is a word that I think we need to think of. Another thing, mostly for our kids too, is for them to understand that there's a huge disruption going on within organizations around going away from hierarchical, going to network, right? So instead of the old hierarchy that you have in an organization, it's more of this kind of mesh network. And what the mesh network is made up of, in many cases, is a bunch of product teams. And going back to what you're saying is you need to focus on what is the what I'm going to do, and then figure out how the how is. Another piece about this word that I want you to kind of think about too is for all of us, right? We all have to be contributors. So it's no longer a place where we are just definers, we're contributors in all of these small teams. So what's happening is big teams are being broken into small teams, they're being broken away from hierarchical into more of a network type of an organization structure. And everybody who's a part of those teams, and those teams themselves are contributors. And if they're not contributors, then it's not, you know, they're not adding value. And so, and this goes back to something I learned years ago in my engineering class. One of the circuit teachers was talking to me, said, well, what you want to do out of a circuit is remove resistors, right? Because why you want to remove resistance in a circuit is because all you get is heat and inefficiency. So everything, remove all the resistance. Well, that works in a human system too. You need to remove the resistors. Every component in the system has to take value from the past component, add value to it, and pass it on. Which now brings to two other words that I think you should think about for our kids, and that is, for the future, it's about being transparent, So open source and a lot of those things go, but it works in the organization too. Be transparent. Don't hold on to your ideas like this. If a person is very transparent, if they could be a collaborative, right? If they're collaborative, if they're a contributor, and they use the multipliers of the technology around, then you will be able to be a part of a transformation business. So, and so that's what I think of transformative. So I think if you keep those things in the back of your mind, it works organizationally and also works systemally.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. All right. Let's move on to another question. If you had the power to deliver just one message to a high school age student right now who is preparing for post-secondary on-ramps, what would it be? Anybody can go first.
Follow your passion.
She stole it. I was going to say follow your heart, but yeah. One of the things that I'd kept always line is like, love what you do and do what you love. Because if you don't, that true north is never going to, you always need to have true north.
I might say don't wait. The resources that are available online are really phenomenal, and they might not know about them. And there's lots of great things like what you're proposing here, which I think can help people become aware of these and get them excited about these things. But if they're already aware and excited, there's tons of cool stuff out there online for free that they can try today on the computers they already have, the phones they already have.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And if we can only engage the kids, we know that when we tell them to do things, they don't like to do it. But when they engage for something, for some reason, whatever it is, they see something that they want to go after, it's all out there, right? You can go meet with a group, you can go online and learn a skill. So that's excellent advice. All right, let's talk about professions. So, one of my concerns is that, kids think, hey, I'm going to be a doctor, or I don't want to be a doctor because blood and I don't like that stuff and whatever. But as we've talked about, as you heard Tim Plenty talk about, being a doctor is going to look very different in 5 to 10 years. Less and less are doctors going to be doing the traditional things that those of us in this room might think of as doctors. So with that thought in mind, let's talk about what professions we've already seen a tremendous, transformation in. Think about whatever you can there. Where do you think the next professions that are really going to get kind of turned over and battled with are going to be? Yeah, so let's leave it at that. What professions, and maybe what professions are likely to stay the same? There's probably a few of them, but not many. So let's start with what professions have changed and are likely to change very soon.
I can start again here. So I'll pick an easy example for one of the ones that's changed, which is a taxi driver. So this is still something that there's actually far more taxi drivers now than there ever were, but the way they do their work looks very different, and the business has grown considerably because it's gone from something that's sort of a hassle for you to schedule to something that's extraordinarily easy for you to schedule. So I don't even own a car, and I have no plans of getting a car. I Lyft or Uber everywhere. Eventually maybe I'll self-drive. And then as far as what professions are not likely to change as much, I think there's always going to be people that are going to be people who talk to customers and translate their needs into a solution. So today that, at a technology company like Google, that might be a product manager, a doctor. I think we'll always have doctors because someone needs to work with the patient. So I still think that customer interface is going to be the same.
Yeah. Maybe the skills that a doctor has to have are going to be different because where they're not doing the same amount of diagnosis, maybe as they go through medical school, whatever that looks like, as they learn the technologies and how they apply and how they let the machines do most of the work, maybe they spend more time on bedside manner and soft skills, which a lot of doctors could use, quite frankly. So it'll be interesting to see how that transforms.
Well, I think there's been massive change in manufacturing and distribution, very, very robotics-centric. I haven't been there, but one of our partners is Amazon, and we're going to go to their distribution center, but my stepdaughter worked there, and she said, really the workers are really just making sure the robots are doing their thing, and they're packing the boxes, because today the robots can't pack the boxes, but someday they will be able to. And so I think that's a big change that is already occurring and will continue to occur.
I think you're spot on. The things which can be automated are probably going to get automated. Right? The things that are not going to get automated, as Elvin added, is anything that adds value. Right? So essentially speaking, that's the primary reason why we are here is because of the knowledge workers. Right? What we call this, the economy is shifting to what's called the subscription economy. Right? So the only people who are going to survive and thrive are the people who keep adding value on a continual basis. No longer do you really have to buy something and be stuck with it. So the question is, what keeps changing? So it's going to be the IT workers. It's going to be people who do create systems which make life more efficient, healthier, better, so that we can have a higher quality of life in general.
I think our future is going to move to more augmented individuals, right? So, and I think this just underlines what everybody is saying here about adding value. But if there's a task that can be automated, it will be automated. You're right, and. Yeah. And Gene, you're right. There's robots. I mean, today I saw. It was a couple weeks ago. It's a robot basically with enough AI in it that you can throw down a box of miscellaneous stuff. So let's say a whole bunch of tubes of toothpaste in front of it, and you can put 4 or 5 boxes. So a whole pile of toothpaste. Let's say a whole pile of little boxes, right, and a whole pile of shampoo bottles. And it will automatically figure out how to pick up one of these things. And you just have to say, I put a shampoo bottle in front of you, or a box of shampoo bottles, and I put a box of toothpaste tubes in front of you, and I put a box of soap in front of you. And then you could put a web front end for it and then say, hey, I want to have 2 things of soap. And so all of a sudden, Birchbox, this where you can get a custom box done to you, is all done by this one automated robot that you don't need to teach. You just, when you have a new product that you want to throw it out in front of it, you put a box of it down there, it'll figure out how to pick it all up, it'll figure out how to pick and pack that thing. And you know what killed me about this? The robot's $150,000, right? Now, what does that mean? That means I can have that in my garage, and I can make my own Birchbox system, which I think is really cool, right? So, I mean, seriously, small business loan, you've got that in there, and you know. So, what I come back to is I come back to augmented individuals. So, all of us need to help the younger generation understand that you are going to have, it's not going to be a role or a function that you are going to have as a job. It's going to be you as an individual, and then technology will augment that. And so you got to figure out what is the you, what is the true north, what is your passion, so that you can drive that through. Because anything that's repetitive, anything that can be automated, will be automated. And that's cool, by the way. That's okay. That's okay. It's not scary.
Yeah, and you brought up the car example. There's more taxi cab drivers, right? Everybody says, well, everybody's going to be out of work. Well, not necessarily. Although driverless cars are coming, so maybe I speak too soon. We will have to find different things to do in different places, but maybe that's starting new innovative businesses in your garage, and as you suggest, the prices of these kinds of things and these maker spaces all make these things possible, right? We just need to be aware of all these things.
I think just one other point. I think it goes back to agility and being able to change. I read an article probably 6 months ago about coal miners, which the coal industry is going down. Coal miners are learning to build technology. And it's those coal miners that aren't stuck in the mine. They're the ones that are using their minds to further, to change and move forward. So I think it's
Yeah. So many things going through my mind. We often romanticize Silicon Valley, Austin, Texas, Boston, Seattle. We talk about different places as tech hubs before we talk about Minnesota. So what do you guys think about that? What do you think about Minnesota? I mean, when I speak the way I do about what we have here, do you see it? Do you feel the same sense? What are your thoughts?
See, I'll speak as someone as an outsider, and this is going to be, so the values that hold us together, like the conservatism, the being more predictable, are also the ones which are holding us back, right? One of the key things I find in Minnesota is that there's more acceptance for a small business than there is for a startup, and there's a very big difference between the two. You can have incremental growth within a company, or you really need to have the wild cards and think outside the box if you want to have a startup. So you need to have those moonshots, which probably most of them, as Andrew found out, have a red line going right through the middle, right? But that culture itself is very relatively rare in Minnesota itself to do on a consistent basis. So it's one of the things that we have to change as a culture and be more accepting of the fact that, yes, failure is an option.
Good.
Yeah.
It is so hard here in Minnesota to do a startup. It is so hard to get money to do a startup. There is plenty of money here in Minnesota, but it's getting access to it is very difficult. And when you do get access to it, there's a huge amount of strings attached that comes with kind of our fiscal conservatism. I'll also say, now, so we need to do something about that. That's one thing. Another thing is that as Minnesotans, we're very humble. And that humble is something that humility is something that I love, right? I really do love that. But it does hold us back. We have to start standing for the things that we stand for and stand up and talk about them, because there's some wonderful stuff going on. And the problem is that there's a huge, for technologists, I'll tell you right now, there's a huge sucking sound to either of the coast for me. I will tell you, I have to try really hard to stay here. And I stay here because I love it here, right? But it would be so much easier if I just uprooted my family and I were to go to the coast, right? But there is a lot of wonderful things here. Another problem too, I'll just say, is that I don't know what to do about young Minnesotans, because on one hand, I want them to go sow the wild oats. I want them to go out and experience the Bay Area. I want them to experience Boston and that area. I want them to experience the world out there, but I want them to come home, right? And so. Because I think that there's one thing about being in the Bay Area, and you're going to talk more about it, Andrew, but I mean, you could go to any coffee shop, right? And I can stand up and say, hey, I'm having a hard time figuring out how to do my cap table and what I'm going to be doing about like diluted investment. And everybody in that coffee shop will have an opinion and be able to give me some help, right? And I can't stand up in a coffee shop. I mean, there might be a coffee shop here where there's that kind of information if I just stood up but the people in the valley will actually talk about it.
Yeah.
So
and that's not an exaggeration. I have some thoughts here. First of all, you might not glamorize Silicon Valley quite so much if you ever try to buy a house there. So Minnesota has some benefits. One of my thoughts is that there have historically, I think, been some big advantages from concentrating in some of the major technology hubs around the lines of investment, around the lines of, you can go into a coffee shop and there'll be a bunch of other people there doing similar things and you can learn a lot from them. But some of those advantages are more imaginary than they are real, and some of those advantages I think are also becoming less useful as technology matures. So. If you work at Google, for example, we have a video conferencing system there that's like very, very good, and it is rare that I'm in a meeting where everyone is in person. Like there's almost always someone on video conference because Google has office all over the world, we have customers all over the world, and the whole company is transformed in a way that it is expected that you can work from anywhere, anytime. And there's a whole bunch of technologies, both for conferencing, for project management, for software, that enable remote collaborators to have an experience that is often as good as what you have in the local office. There's also, airplanes that can take you from place to place. And then I mentioned I think some of the advantages are a bit imaginary. So the financing one is one I hear a lot. And in my own case, so when we moved to the Bay Area, one of the motivations was we thought it'd be easy to raise money there. Well, it turns out the vast majority of our investment came from investors in Boston and New York. And so we did go down to Sand Hill Road and we pitched all those folks and we did get some money from them, but we ended up getting on a plane and flying to the East Coast to raise most of the money that we did. And that's something you can do just as easily from Minnesota as you can from anywhere. And then the last thought I have here is that I agree with what we were saying earlier about the next wave of things being the application of technology. Like we've built a lot of really cool core technologies, but the next big businesses are going to be people like Airbnb and Uber and Facebook, where they're not really inventing new storage technologies, new compute technologies, or new semiconductors. They are applying these to specific types of businesses, and Minnesota is an expert in a bunch of these fields. So, agriculture, medicine, et cetera. You listed a whole bunch at the beginning, and that next set of big businesses is going to be the application of these technologies that were maybe built by folks in Silicon Valley or one of these tech hubs, but applications of those technologies to things that we are experts on here. And I think there's a big opportunity there.
Minnesota has the University of Minnesota is here, and they have a program called Minnesota Cup, and it's helping young entrepreneurs, include down to the youth division, all the way through entrepreneurs in a variety of spaces, and they're getting funding for these people. Target has their Epic Awards. And 2 of our young people from our Technovation program were Epic Award winners. So it's, I think there's a lot going on that the companies like Target and Amazon is here, maybe not their headquarters, but Amazon is here and they're doing a lot to further the making Minnesota a place to be.
Gene, I wanted just to say that I didn't mean to trash what's going on here. There's a lot of really, really good energy. I've been working a lot lately in the startup stuff and some of the stuff that we leaned in with Target as well, not only with that and Techstars and some of the things like that. There's really a lot of energy here. I guess the real call out I just wanted to say to everybody is like, I need all of us to lean into this, and all of us need to celebrate this, and we need to kind of go out there. And one last thing I'll just really quickly say. When I was bringing in people from the coast, this is what I would say, is I'd say, listen, you might not want or maybe not even care to have a 30-year career at Target. But what I can promise you is that you can have a very awesome career at Target for as long as you want. And afterwards, you can have a career in technology for 30, 40, 50 years here in the Twin Cities, and you could go to other retailers, you can go to other Fortune 50 companies, you can go to startups. And so the real key is come here, put your roots down, raise your family, and be a part of the community, because it's a great community here. And that is where the power of it is here, is that you can spend 5 years, and that's in 5 years at Target, go to Best Buy if you care to, go to United Health Group. If you don't want to do the corporate thing, there's a whole bunch. The ecosystem here, I mean, we have a really good, did you know that we, over the last 4 years, we did $4 billion of investments in startups? No one knows that. It's just really amazing.
Plus you get a house on a lake, right?
Yeah, you got a house on the lake, absolutely. Darn it.
That you can afford.
Well, he said he was going to give me one, I heard. So.
You know what, if that'll get you back here.
I do want to make a plug for the Minnesota Cup. I think it's one of the wonderful experiences. We actually won that in 2014, and of all the things in the company's history, that's probably the most transformative event that actually occurred. Right, the money is good, but the PR that we got from it, it really put us on a different scale. So, I mean, there's a great ecosystem. So don't get me wrong about that. The question is really, is $4 billion enough? Right, and where is that money really going? Is it going into startups, or is it really going into other starting new businesses? And there's a difference. There's a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a few things that I'm going to comment on. One's kind of a cute story. I was at another event talking about this, and one of the young women in the room said, you know, my husband and I, we were considering where to move. I can't remember where she and her husband were from originally, but they were in technology, and her comment to the group was, you know, we checked out Austin, and Minnesota was on the list, so we're making the list, so that's good. And her comment was, and I think this speaks to who we are, she said, you know, you date Austin, but you marry Minnesota. And I think we can all understand what that means. This is a great place to raise a family. And that makes me think about some of the comments you talked about, how we apply technology. So, and I talked about how it's kind of under the current here. We don't think of ourselves as a technology state or area, but we really are. And it's because all our what we use is we deploy and we employ technology. You know, some people are creating it, and that's kind of where Silicon Valley is, and Austin is a little bit more. They're trying to create new technology. Andrew, you're a great example. You're an enabler, right? You're creating technologies that people can build on top of. Depinder, he's a great example of a deployer. He's taking these technologies and he's applying it to the things that are going to solve real problems for real people. And that's what we do so well here in Minnesota. When you think about our industries and how we apply technology to people, to human needs, it goes to the fabric of who we are in Minnesota. And that's something we should be proud of. And it's something that we should foster this technology in our state and foster this path because it's so fulfilling. So if kids have the skills to onboard, and we have this rich fabric here with all these companies, and we talk about the cross-pollination that we could do between these industries to use these technologies now that allow us to have these just tremendous breakthroughs. Minnesota is the greatest place in the world to make some of these things happen. We just need to make sure that we get that message to the kids so they understand why these technologies are important. And in talking about that cross-pollination, that brings up just a third point I want to make quickly, which is, it's interesting, the state of Minnesota is so innovative. Our culture, something about our DNA here. I don't know if it was the cold weather when we got here first or what it was that caused us to be innovative. But when you think about the Cray researches and the Medtronics and the 3Ms, the innovation cultures within these organizations is intense. It's amazing. It's awesome. But it's interesting, we don't cross-pollinate very well. So we stay in silos here a little bit. And I've noticed that just among the tech groups in town, because I visit all of them. I see myself as kind of horizontal across technology because my interest is in data and content and information, which is sort of the fuel for everything we've talked about today. It's kind of a center point. So I go to all sorts of different groups, and I see how focused they are, which is part of their success. They're focused. They get a bunch of people who are enthusiastic about one thing or another, and that's great. That's what all these meetup groups and all these things allow people to do and go learn. But we also have to pay more attention to the cross-pollination between these groups, right? And that's another thing that we're talking about with the great Minnesota Tech2Gether, right? There's one thing we do really well getting together here, and that's the state fair every year, right? Millions of people. We love it, and we cherish it, and we celebrate that. It's really part of who we are here. Well, let's take that energy toward our future, because we have something that we need to protect here. And we want to protect that way of life that we're commenting on throughout this thread of this conversation. And we need to create a platform for that, right? So that's what we're doing here. We're creating a stage where all of you can come together. We're not trying to upstage anyone. We're just building it. We want you to be up on it, right? So, and that takes a little cross-pollination, right? So that's something we need to work on. So I'm taking kind of some of the comments I've heard here and trying to hone it into another message, which is let's trust each other a little bit. Let's not say, oh, geez, if our group mixes with that group, some of our members might go over there or what. I don't know. It's kind of a Minnesota nice, passive-aggressive, passive paranoia, passive something, right? And we need to work on it, because if we don't, people are going to move to the coast. And if they move to the coast and we don't solve this tech shortage that we're in, then our industries are going to move out of here. And if that happens, this wonderful infrastructure and all these beautiful benefits that we have in this great place we call Minnesota are going to slowly start to drift away. And we really can't afford to let that happen. So we've got to keep working on this, and we need to bring visions like this together. I want to leave time for any comments that might be, or any questions that might be coming from the crowd. Just raise your hand if you have a question, and we'll get to you. Perfect. Does anybody want to bring the mic over to him? Okay, that could work too. Let's see if it's on. I'm not sure that it is yet.
I guess this technology advancements and innovation have a huge social implications. I guess I'd like to kind of get the panel of experts' opinion on what is the ethical and social responsibility for these technology leaders and the technology company towards the society. I guess, you know, how would I respond to a truck driver who might be losing his job to an autonomous truck, or a doctor who might be losing his job, or a coal miner?
Sure. How do we address the disruption?
How do we address that disruption?
That's a very broad question. I'll comment on the truck driver one specifically. I think the main message I would want to send here is it doesn't have to be scary. In the case of the truck drivers, there's been a lot of people sort of wringing their hands over the autonomous driving and the trucks that are coming out. And granted, we haven't seen it happen yet, so I might be completely wrong here, but I've read a fair amount about it, and there's a lot of people speculating that this will actually be sort of a net good thing for a lot of truck drivers, in that part of the job of a truck driver is sitting at the wheel for 10 hours on a freeway driving a long distance. But a big part of what the truck driver does is at the destination points, where they're interfacing with the customers, they're loading and unloading goods, and that's a job that is much harder to automate, that will probably exist for a long time. The job of the truck driver may change from half of that and half sitting on the road to full-time working at the termination points for these things. And one of the big benefits of that is the truck drivers wouldn't have to be on the road all the time anymore, right? They could spend all their time loading, unloading, and working with the customers in the local region, and they can go home at night to their families. And then the long-haul routes between the cities, those can be automated, and the trucks can go from point to point. We'll see if that's what comes to pass, but my hope is that the net effect is that we still have these jobs. They are better paying, higher skilled jobs. They are safer, and the people can stay home with their families. Granted, that same transformation may not happen to every industry. There may be some things that go away, but I think if you look over the long-term trend for technology, it's generally been a net positive for society. That new jobs pop up where you don't expect them, and those end up being often better jobs in many ways.
I would just add to that, we need to trust history a little bit, right? When somebody invented fire, somebody said, oh my God, that's a terrible idea, that's going to get out of control, right? And yet I think we'd all agree that it's worked to our advantage, and every once in a while we make a mistake, but it doesn't mean we should run the other direction from these things. And quite frankly, the other point I'll make is that it's not going to stop because we think it might be scary. It's going to keep moving forward, regardless of our opinion of that, right? So I'm glad that you brought up the sort of the ethical dimension, because we need people to think about that too, and give that good thought and understand what's going on. But we need to trust what's always happened. People always sell it short, and whenever there's an any kind of a revolution, somebody's saying, my gosh, what are we going to do for a living if we don't farm? Well, I think most of us have figured out that there's all kinds of things, and the world has become much more interesting, multifaceted place. So, and as Governor Plenty points out, these technologies are going to solve huge problems as well, right? So, So anyway, just a few comments. Anyone else want to?
Yeah, there's something I want to kind of get into about ethics. I just want to look to all of you because I think all of us have to be mentors for our teams, right? We have, I can't tell you how many deep discussions I've had with my engineers around the ethical pieces of the technology that we're building. Not so much maybe about what will happen for the end users, but a lot about things like, you know, we are honored with dealing with people's personal data, with their privacy, with their security, with being able to know something about them, mostly in retail. We want to know something about you so that we can help you and provide better products and services. But the gift that you're giving us by saying yes, we will allow you, me to know you or my systems to know you. We have to honor it as well and know that we have to have it secure. We need to be able to deal with the privacy issues about it. We need to talk a lot about, we're all, locationing, all of that kind of stuff. And I think ultimately we need to have these conversations with our kids that we're teaching, with our own teams, and within our communities so that we handle this stuff right as we're building it from the ground up. And the last thing I'll say is that what also will happen is a bunch of unintended consequences. And I'll just say, and I'm going to light a tinder here, but I'll walk away from it fast. But a lot of this talk right now about foreign governments influencing our election, they really, what's happening is people are, what they're doing is they're using what we built against us, right? Because if you look at Google and you look at Facebook, they were built to give information to you in a way that's curated for you. And so what happens unintentionally is you have an echo chamber that happens out of that. And for the marketing perspective, that's great because I can market to that specific echo chamber, right? But but that also means that I could go in and influence in ways that I didn't have intended consequences for. And so now as technologists, we're trying to figure out how we unwind that personalization so that it isn't used against us. But I'll tell you right now, having been involved in a lot of that personalization, that's really hard to unwind from the bottom up, right? So there's a lot of ethical things that have to be thought about, and you have to think about the unintended consequences too.
I think one of the beauties of what makes us human is evolution, right? I mean, we have the ability to change and adapt. So you're absolutely right. Even though in the short term there might be some jobs which history will no longer remember, but it doesn't mean as a human race we will not have progressed. I think that was the whole point that Andrew made as well, that overall, in general, technologies had a net positive impact on society in general, specifically in terms of quality of living. Right? I don't know about the human interaction. Those are probably dying away, some of those. But in terms of the quality of living, in terms of the access to the material things that we have, that framework has definitely improved quite a bit.
I think part of it goes back to soft skills. Maybe some of the people today who are losing their jobs to whatever technology is taking over will have a difficult time. But as we mentor, not only mentor through our work, but mentor through mentoring for kids in programs like Code Savvy programs, because we're looking for mentors and sponsors. But I think those soft skills and those things that you teach the kids now, they will become more resilient as they get older, and as things, that little spirals tightens and tightens, things will change constantly from now on.
Okay, good. So it's been a wonderful conversation so far. It's about 10:20, and so I think that has been a great duration for the panel. Now, before we break for a moment, I'd just like to say what's going to happen next is we're going to get into small groups. So you will find a number on the bottom of your name tag, which you may or may not have noticed. And it's very small, and it might be printed almost off of the name tag. So but I think you can infer what it is. It's either a 1, 2, 3, or a 4 for the partner community that got name tags. And there's 4 classrooms that we're going to divide into, and we're going to continue these conversations. We're going to start talking a little bit more specifically about, is the business community doing enough right now to make these signals? What are they doing to help with the workforce? What could they be doing? We're going to look at that from those same questions from the angle of the educators, the both post-secondary as well as secondary education, and we're going to talk about how the tech groups can. So we're going to work on this vision, right? Because our collective task now is to consider the outcomes we're trying to achieve and determine what needs to be done, and we're going to do that in the scope of our goal of the Great Minnesota Tech2Gether to create this vision. And so we're going to, in other words, roll up our sleeves a little bit more and get down to some work and in a more engaging environment. I know it's hard sometimes. This has been almost 2 hours, I think, of a big, voluminous room like this, and it starts to kind of get you to sleep. So I think it's time we all stand up, get another cup of coffee. And by the way, the STA community, if there's anyone that is, representative or sitting there feeling strongly about education or about business, you are invited to join our breakout groups. So please don't feel like you have to go home. You can stay and keep working with us throughout the day. You're all from business and industry or something. So if you want to join us, please feel free to do so. I'd also encourage you guys to stop and take a look at what 75F is doing so you get a really good vision of what we think this room could be filled with, right? I think that'll help you to understand. And we also have the First Tech group over here. This would be an example of what we will have in the on-ramps room, right? So I'm sorry I haven't mentioned anybody yet. They're sitting at this table right here. A couple of their students that are in the robotics team. I encourage you to go talk to them a little bit as well. So we'll break for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll come back here. I'll give some kind of specific instructions about what we're going to do in the room for the people who are going to continue on, and then we will get into our rooms and get to work. All right? Thank you.